To the UK next, where several police officers have been injured trying to separate anti-immigrant rioters from counter-protesters in the city of Plymouth. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said he would be deploying, quote, a standing army of police officers as violent riots threaten to stretch into a second week. More than 370 people have been arrested in connection with the unrest so far, which followed the fatal stabbings of 3 young girls in the town of Southport.
The aftermath of attacks by far-right groups on this hotel in Rotherham, targeting the asylum seekers living here. Some demonstrators say the violence escalated beyond their expectations.
I arrived yesterday at about 1 o'clock to do a peaceful protest. I didn't want any violence to happen. I saw a police officer knocked unconscious. It did shock us. We were a little bit scared at start, but I understand why people have been upset and the retaliation from it.
Similar unrest has erupted in several towns and cities across parts of the UK in recent days. It was initially sparked by the killing of 3 young girls in a dance class in the town of Southport. Reports spread on social media falsely claimed the perpetrator was an asylum seeker who had recently arrived in the UK. The riots are often being met by counter-protests. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has denounced the disorder.
Whatever the apparent motivation, this is not protest, it is pure violence, and we will not tolerate attacks on mosques or our Muslim communities. So the full force of the law will be visited on all those who are identified as having taken part in these activities.
But condemnation by the government has not dissolved all fears. These members of London's Muslim community say they no longer feel safe.
I feel very stressed and it's a very distressing moment in our life. We've never seen this kind of far-right group active against anti-immigrant. So we are living fear and anxiety. This could be anything could happen to us.
Well, I feel threatened, scared to come out of my house because Muslim people, we're not terrorists. That's how I feel like. I feel like we're being threatened, it's not safe.
Several countries, including Indonesia and Nigeria, have warned their citizens living in or visiting the UK to stay vigilant and avoid the far-right demonstrations.
Let's get more from DW's Charlotte Chelson-Peel joining me now from London. Charlotte, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has vowed to crack down on these riots. How will he do that?
Well, this is the worst, most widespread case of unrest in the UK in over 10 years. And as such, the Prime Minister has come out saying very clearly that those involved in criminal activity will face the full force of the law. Now, we got a sense of what that's going to look like going forward when he announced that there would be a standing army deployed to hotspots. Now, what does that mean? It's essentially a force of specially trained police officers who can go and assist local forces in the area who are specialised in dealing with rioting, such as what we're seeing on the streets of the UK. It does not mean that the army will be deployed. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has dismissed calls for that so far. So there is the dealing with it on the streets element of this. There is then the justice system that he has promised to beef up in order to process those who've been arrested quickly. There are some concerns, though. The justice system here is very overstretched. Prisons known to be very overcrowded, but the Prime Minister has promised that they do have the resources in place to deal with this. And finally, he has made very clear that any action online deemed to be criminal will be dealt with as much force of the law as any criminal activity on the streets.
Do we know anything about how and where these far-right groups have been organising?
Well, the short and generalised answer to that is online. We know that this violence was triggered by the spread of false information online in connection with the suspect of an attack on young girls, which left 3 dead. Agitators have since been spreading misinformation online, so that is a concern. But the far right here is pretty decentralised now. Police did point to an organisation called the English Defence League in relation to unrest in an English city, in Southport, where that attack took place. But that's now defunct, essentially, although its leaders are still online, prominent figures from the English Defence League, and they are thought to be agitating this unrest.
And this false information or online disinformation, how is this being dealt with?
Well, the government said that it is looking at that very closely. As I say, they will crack down on anyone taking part in criminal activity online, agitating this unrest. They are also looking at the involvement, potentially, they say, of hostile foreign states in spreading misinformation. The Prime Minister himself has said the disinformation we've seen online attracts amplification from known bot activities. That's something they'll be looking at. They will also be hoping to push social media organizations to do more themselves. But we know historically that that's tricky.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks so much for joining us today, though. DW Charlotte Chelsom-Pill reporting from London. Thanks so much.